How's it going, everybody? I want to welcome everyone to episode 4 of the You versus You podcast, where we talk about getting 1% better every single day and winning the battle that is ourselves and the person that we were yesterday. I am being joined by Toan Truong, who I made sure that I pronounced his name correctly before we got started. He's someone that I've been meaning to get on a podcast with for quite some time. We had a couple of scheduling conflicts, but I'm super happy to have you here with me today, man. Please give an introduction to yourself to anyone that might be listening.
Wow, thank you so much for having me on this podcast, Tom. So, hello everyone. My name is Toan. This year I turned 18. And like 3 years ago, I got fed up with the education system because I felt like I was just sitting in class and wasting my time. Like I even remember it was like some math class, and I turned around to one of my friends and I asked her like, "Hey, why are we actually even learning this?" And she couldn't even give me a real answer for it. So that summer, I basically like convinced my parents to let me homeschool. And from there, I went on to do a lot of things. And one of those things was finish my high school program at 16. And I also built this Twitter account to 5,000 followers. So yeah, a lot of things that we can talk about in this podcast.
That's awesome, man. And I think that message resonates with a lot of people because I feel a lot of people think that the education system has failed them in one way, shape, or form. Just like you said, learning a lot of things that people don't necessarily need in their entire life, and they're learning things that they won't even need for years and years and years to come. So I think that, excuse me, I think that you're an excellent person to talk on the subject of personal growth and most apparently the learning techniques for personal growth. So diving right into it, what have you found to be the most effective learning techniques that you've discovered through your homeschooling and personal education journey? And how have they helped you in your academic journey of finishing your high school program at 16?
Yeah, so that is a great question. So like I would say like comparing to me right now to like me 3 years ago when I first started this journey, like I have learned a lot of different techniques and different strategy to do things. And I would say like my strategy back then to graduate early is nowhere as effective as the one that I'm using right now. So I think it will
Interesting.
be much better for me to give you the one that I'm actually using. So the way that I see it is like you have information, and then the information goes into your brain from one of the five senses, and that will be like into your working memory. And usually in the working memory, the information is just gonna stay there for like a few seconds to a few minutes, and to ensure that the information like stick into your long-term memory, which is like a storage for you to store the information inside, you must go through a process called encoding. And if you can encode it properly, it means that you can store it properly. And now, after you store something, there's two pathways that you can go down. One, if you don't revise that piece of knowledge, it will be forgotten because like there is this concept called the forgetting curve, which is like you learn it like today is your knowledge maybe up here, but tomorrow it drops down a little, and the next day it drops down a bit more. It's like a downward curve like this. But every time you
Yeah,
revise
yeah.
it, it reminds your brain that the piece of knowledge is important, and it will remind you of what you forgot. And that's your chance to re-encode it into your brain. So from there, it will be a
Interesting.
cycle of encoding and retrieving. And I mean, like this, I could dive into like the details of it because there's more to this. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great, man. And I really like the conceptualization of that because I think that makes a lot of sense to me because I know when I first learned something, just like you said, there's
Yeah.
a bell curve to the learning, right? You learn something
Yes.
and you have it really high up on your knowledge scale, and then as time goes on, it just kind of slips away if you don't proactively continue to read about it, continue to learn about it. So I find it really interesting that you talk about this practice of encoding and retrieving because I think that you've kind of done that with the actual technique itself. So now you've become an expert and a very knowledgeable person on that. So with that new technique that you've discovered, if you wanted to dive a bit more into it and maybe even about the challenges that you faced prior to actually learning this technique and then applying it to the learnings that you have today.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I guess the biggest challenge about learning these techniques is like you need to find the source to learn these techniques. Because I would say like just like any niche or field on the internet, like there are a lot of people who call themselves guru or teacher who are just teaching you stuff or regurgitating information that is not backed by science and it's not that effective. Like one of those things are like flashcard, like just using Anki flashcard. You probably heard of them.
Oh,
They
absolutely.
usually
Yeah.
use the term like spaced repetition and active recall. Those are really popular. Even Sahil Bloom and the big influencer talk about them. And like I have nothing against those techniques, but the problem is that those techniques are they are like trees in a forest. And if you only focus on the one tree, then you're missing the bigger picture of what is going on. And I would say
Mm.
the the second big challenge that I have to go through is actually unlearning a lot of the things that I have learned about learning. Because like uh, for almost like 9 years of my life, I went through elementaries, middle school, and high school, and first year of high school, and like I was using all of the wrong technique that was just pure inefficient, and like just the act of unlearning it is like really challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There's two concepts in there that I would love for us to distill down a little bit more because both of them ring very true to me. And it's funny that you said looking at one tree as opposed to the forest, because that's something I talk about in my professional life all the time. So in my professional life, I do a lot of things like analysis and around numbers and statistics. And the biggest problem that a lot of people who have analytical minds face is
Yeah.
that they're not able to see the forest from the trees. They
Yeah.
focus on the one plant, and then when you have to bring it into a bit of a higher level for maybe like higher ups or upper management to understand, they're unable to communicate that. So I love that you brought that into the lens of learning as well. And then on learning things, that's such a huge concept that a lot of people aren't able to conceptualize when it
Yes.
comes to health, wellness, mental health, everything that I wouldn't say everything, but 50% of old wise tales and knowledge that people are taught aren't actually true. But the fact that it was ingrained in them over and over and over and over again, they just have an unconscious bias towards it, and they think that they can keep doing it and doing it and doing it. I think one of the biggest unconscious biases, not to bring this a little bit off track, is people believing that eggs are completely unhealthy for them because they're high in cholesterol. But people don't
Yeah.
understand that there was multiple clinical studies done. I believe one that was concluded in around 2018 that showcased that people can eat 6 to 7 eggs a day, and it has absolutely no effect on their blood lipid cholesterol whatsoever. So that's just a little tidbit of information there. But I would love for us to dive deeper on unlearning things. How did you face unlearning the, I would call, poor habits that you had around learning before? And then once you unlearn those things, did you go through that process of encoding and retrieving that you were talking about earlier?
Yeah. So I would say like I have not like unlearned all of the bad habits that I have since the school year. But the process
Mm-hmm.
that I use is first like to be aware that I have these like bad habits first, and then to like overcome these bad habits, I use something called the Kolb experimental cycle, and this is basically a concept.
The cult experimental cycle.
KOLB, Kolb's experimental
Kolb.
cycle.
Gotcha. Very cool. I just want to write it down because it sounds interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Like
So
the first
please
time that I
continue.
learned it, it sounds really
Yeah.
cool as well. So the Cope experimental cycle, I'm just gonna call it the Cope for short, has 4 stages. First is the experience itself, so like the thing that you just did, and then the second is like the reflection. And for the reflection, you will have some prompts, like there are questions about the experience that you just had, and when you answer these questions, you will discover like the limiting beliefs, or the external factors, or like you can see like the step-by-step way that you did something. And from there, it's basically like you going to the doctor and you're prescribing it. You're describing your illness, your problem to the doctor. And that is the reflection. And after you finish the reflection, the next part is the abstraction. Abstraction is where you look again at all of your question and everything that you have written down, and you will identify the pattern, the trend, and form some hypothesis and some prediction into why something is happening, right? And the key with this is that you don't want to be guessing from like thin air. You want to look at what you have written down and use it as a reference point for yourself. Because like you are drawing from the reflection, you're drawing from your experience. And then from there, afterward, the last step is creating some new experiments for you to test those hypotheses. And then once you do that, like you have new experiments to test it out. And then it's the cycle again. Like you test it out and then you reflect to see if it works, the abstraction, then new experiments. And it's like an endless upward spiral of 1% improvement. And yeah, it's really helpful. And it's like having your own doctor for any problem that you have.
I really like that, man. Genuinely, I've never heard of that concept before, and I'm gonna look into that without a doubt. You know, you're so knowledgeable on all of these learning techniques. You're so knowledgeable about unlearning things, and I know that as someone who likes to teach people, and I wouldn't call myself a guru ever. I think I'm more of a guide, and I think that you would probably feel the same way about yourself. How did you go about researching these things for you to begin this journey of becoming a very knowledgeable individual on the subject? Did you just type in on Google like learning techniques, or was there a process that you actually went through to be like, hey, this looks really cool, like this looks like something I want to research? And then how did you distill the knowledge that may not have served you very well?
That's a great question. And I would say like I could find this on my own. Like I could go out there and search on Google to learn about these techniques, but that is not what I did. Like, in the past, sure, like I was really interested in learning. I post about random techniques like that, but then I realized that fundamentally something feels wrong. So I start to look for like the 1% and the best person when it comes to when it comes to learning. And in this case, I found a doctor on YouTube. His name is Dr. Justin Song. Song is Sung. And he has a course that is basically like an entire cognitive retraining program that help you unlearn all the bad habits and help you train and learn the new and effective learning habits. And the reason that I'm talking about this course is because I realized that it is the only course like that I've seen that actually tell the students to slow down. They actually lock the module away and they actively tell people to practice the technique. And from practicing and making a lot of mistakes, I realized that everything that they lay out actually makes sense. And like the more that I learn about it, the more that I practice about it, the more knowledgeable I become in the field. So I would say like probably like 80 to 90% of everything I know about learning and learning science is from that course and from Dr. Justin Song. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've never heard of him before, but again, I'm learning so much on this podcast. I'm definitely going to wind up looking him up to research some of his learnings. I find it super interesting that you also mentioned the practice of practice, right? And that's something that I always try to hammer home when I'm speaking to either my clients or speaking to my Twitter following or any of my social media following. You can read 1,000 self-help books, or you can read 1,000 different pieces of knowledge about learnings and studying techniques. But if you don't practice the techniques that are in that book, if you don't actually take the learnings that you've learned and apply them to something, you're never going to get that 1% better. You need to be constantly practicing. And I don't remember the exact number, but there was an individual that is really, really high level when it comes to these things that said that it takes 10,000 hours to become an expert on a subject, and 9,000 of those hours is practice. 1,000 hours of that is actual physical experience, right? How long would you say that it took you to learn these techniques, and how did you go about practicing them? Did you just go full on into your education applying these techniques, or did you take a step back and then, like you said, do practice modules and things along those lines?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when it comes to practicing these techniques, first I must tell you about one of this concept. It's called interleaving. And interleaving, it's actually a pretty well studied concept, but like the most of the study are for like basketball player. So like here's how it works. Like there's this coach, like
Oh, interesting.
he divide his team into two groups. Like group A only does like the 3 point shot, like only 3 points. And the second group, like they do like the 2 point shot, the layup, and the 3 points, and all sort of different variation of the shot. So like one group, you will see like it's a concentration on one exercise, and the second one is like a variety of mixed exercise that are together. So the study found that actually the group number one, they felt really comfortable. They got really good at the 3 point shot because like they felt like every time that they got it in, like they were making progress. But on the other side, the second group, they felt frustrated. They felt like it wasn't working because like before the 2 point shot was easy, but then the 3 point shot they got it wrong, and like so the progress for them seems really slow. But at the end of the experiment, the coach had both of the group uh, and test them on the 3 point shot. And the result was that the second group did much better than the first group.
Really? Wow.
And
That's super
yeah,
interesting.
and the same principle also apply to math. Like instead of just shooting into the hoop, like the teacher had the student like do some practice question, and it was a similar result that the students who did a variety different techniques and different problem perform much better than the other one who just did like a concentration of one type of exercise. So I'm telling you about this because like the way of practice is that you don't just do one thing over and over and over again. It's like you mixing it up, you using different form of practice. Maybe today you're gonna write like a brain dump of everything you remember about it. Maybe tomorrow it could be you like trying to um, teach the concept to someone, or the next day it could be you using a different technique to remind yourself. It could be like you creating a video about it. So, and the point is that you don't rely yourself on one technique, but instead you spread it out and you approach that piece of knowledge from different angles. Because the more angles that you approach that knowledge from, the more connection and the more points of contact that you have. And I know I'm going on a ramble a bit, but I just want
No, no,
you
no.
to
Please continue.
visualize. I just want you to visualize your knowledge like a spider web. And the more connected and the more connection that it has, the stronger it will be and the less that you will forget. Yeah.
That's awesome. I find that so incredibly interesting. Genuinely. Why do you think that that is? I know that that's a bit of a broad question, but why do you personally believe that even though the and I'm applying this to the basketball example,
Yeah.
why is it that the group that only practiced 3 point shots didn't do as well as the group that practiced multiple techniques? Do you think that it has something to do with like neuroplasticity, the mind getting too used to something and then subconsciously believing that it's easy, so you don't put it in as much effort? What is your take on why approaching knowledge from different angles actually ties it closer to your subconscious?
Yeah. That's a
And you don't
great
have to
question.
have you
And
don't have to have the right answer, right? It's just I'm just interested in your opinion.
yeah, my opinion is that I learned this theory recently, which is the cave theory. which is like your brain remembers something it so that it can help you survive and thrive. Because like if you think about millions of years ago when we're still living in a cave, all we actually care about was to survive the saber-toothed tigers and also thriving, getting the food and feeding the family, right? And even though like we have all these technology nowadays, like our brain haven't evolved that much. It's pretty much the same thing. And from there, we found that actually we will remember something much more if it solves a problem or there's some sort of pattern that we found. And people found that if it satisfies one or both of those criteria, that's much more memorable for you. So I would say like interleaving is an effective method because like every time you interleave something, it's you like doing that practice from a different way. And maybe like it's not just the throw itself, but it's about the power, the position of the hand, and maybe like the awareness around you. And all of that will play together into like forming the technique for you to shoot itself. And if you're just going to stand right in the 3-point shot and going to do it, then it's just like you in one place getting used to one thing. But in the other one, you have more control and more awareness into like what you're actually doing. So I think that's the reason why interleaving is an effective method.
That's super interesting. I really like your take on that. And I honestly, I must say that I completely agree. You know, it's like the mind is a muscle, right? And just like when it comes down to physical activity, you never want your only exercise when you're developing your whole body's musculature to only work one muscle, right? You don't want to only do bench press. You don't want to only squat. You don't want to only deadlift. You want to do a combination of those 3 lifts. And then you want to also do isometric exercises like bicep curls, tricep extensions. And I'm conceptualizing that because the brain is also an extremely complex muscle, right? So the concept of interweaving and looking at things from different angles is almost like working your brain with different exercises. Would you agree on that conceptualization of that?
Yes, like it's all about forming the different connection for what you're learning. It's giving you different angles to look at things. Because like, once again, I come back to this point, which is if something is isolated, it's going to be forgotten. And the more connection you have, the more like, the stronger that, knowledge is going to be. Like, if you just think about it, like for me, like I, watch sport a lot. Like, in the beginning, like I don't know any player and I don't know any club. The rule is kind of weird, but after a while, I watch it. I realized that hey, maybe like this player, he's the striker and he's important because like he is the person who scored the goal, and how's he related to something else like maybe the midfielder? And from there, like I formed this new connection, which is like, oh, the midfielder is the person who passed the ball to this one. So that's how they relate to each other. And like the more question that you form about how different pieces of knowledge relate to each other, the stronger that connection becomes. And also one more point I want to talk about, since you brought up fitness, is that
Sure, please.
in fitness, I know there's a term called like progressive overload, and there's actually something similar when you learn. It's called like cognitive load theory, which is when if you just learn something and you don't struggle or you don't feel that sense of like discomfort or you don't feel that bit of overwhelming when you learn, there's a very high chance that you did not learn it properly. Because that process of struggling and thinking about that knowledge is when your brain is trying to learn it. It's when your brain trying to categorize and like form those connections. So if you just get through that discomfort, then you're just not going to learn it and you end up having to learn it over and over and over again. So yeah, I just wanted to bring that in.
No, that's an awesome theory, and you're saying all these terms. All of these theorems that, quite frankly, I wish I knew about, because I think cognitive learning theory, as you explained it, is a perfect metaphor for personal growth. Right? There's beauty in the struggle. if you're not going through the struggle, if you're not pushing yourself to become better, if you're not trying to learn those new things, you're not trying to make each workout more difficult than the previous one,
Yeah.
you're not going to become better, right? You're just going to be standing still. And even if you're just struggling that 1%, that 2%, that 3%, then you're actually pushing yourself to learn. There was a question that I thought of before we brought up the cognitive learning theory, which I actually want to expand upon a little bit more. But is there an academic example that you could bring up of when you used interweaving and then learned about a subject outside of sports? So applying it to something like math, or maybe applying it to something like goal setting. What's a good example that you would give to everybody that is listening right now so that they themselves can look at it from a different angle?
So do you want me to address one for the students, the adult in the working field, or what target
Whichever one you
audience
feel
are you
most
looking
comfortable
for?
talking about. Whichever one you feel most comfortable.
Yeah. So like, I mean the students one. Okay. So if you are a student trying to learn math, one of the problem with the way that math is being taught right now is um, like before I can explain that, I must tell you something that there are three types of knowledge. Okay. There are declarative knowledge. So this is like the date, the number, the facts about things. Then there's procedural knowledge. This is the skill you do, like riding a bike, cooking food, cleaning the house. This is you doing the stuff, or even like an experiment that could be like a procedural. And thirdly, you have a thing called like conditional knowledge. This is when you know when and how to use a piece of knowledge. And in math, you will see that actually, like if you have a pie chart like this, an entire circle, like only a tiny bit is focused on the theory of it. And then after you learn about theory, everyone just gives you like practice question to actually like dive in, do the question, and then do even more question. Or that's at least how I see most students do it. And the problem is that you can do the question, but it's gonna take a really long time because you don't understand the theory behind why it works yet. And math is just like any other language, any other subject. It's just like language art. It's just like chemistry, because like the way that you learn that information is all like similar to each other. So the way that you would apply interleaving into a subject like math is like first you would have to like understand the theory and try to create this visual knowledge schema. So it's like this web of how different concepts are connected to each other. And don't try to put this in your head because like it's really hard to like visualize the entire thing in your head. Like you can write it
Mm-hmm.
out on a piece of paper, or like if you have an iPad, then that would be even better. Draw it on an infinite canvas, and then from there you will see how different concepts relate to each other, and then you would do the problem, and then you will understand it much easier. And now instead of just doing a 1-to-1 ratio, which means like you're doing one problem and it's help you solve one problem in itself, now you can do one problem and it will save you like 10 problems in the future, because like you already understand why it works and how it works. And then that one example could be amplified to more ways. And in
Hmm.
interleaving, I mean, like interleaving, there's a lot of way you can interleave with math or any other subject. Like I said, like with math, one of the technique is for you to create your own practice question instead of relying on the one that was given to you. The second way is that you could like um, have a group discussion about why a concept work, group discussion, and have each other debate with each other to see like how something works, or like if there's any point that you guys don't understand. Third way, you can teach it to someone. Fourth way, you can like do like a brain dump of everything you remember to see if there's anything that you forgot. And I mean, like there is um, a lot of ways for you to do it. And like the principle of interleaving is that if a technique requires you to think a lot about the relationship between it and the different concept around it, then it's the more thinking and the more evaluation and the more comparison that you have to do, the higher the percentage that you will remember that concept, and the more effective the interleaving method is going to be. And also, one last point on interleaving is that, like, when you do interleaving, like, try to focus on your weakest point. Like, it feels good to do the one that you're good at. Like, just if you're really good at bench press, and then you just keep wanting to do more reps of it, but then your like a dumbbell bicep curl sucks, then it's probably more effective for you to improve on your weakness, because that will make you a much more holistic, and like it will be much better. And yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. Genuinely. Yeah. I love the way that you conceptualize it. I love the way that you think about it. And really there's so many lessons to be learned in these theories and these learning techniques that can be applied to anywhere in life, right?
Yeah.
Constantly breaking out of your comfort zone, constantly wanting to improve. You can't really improve if you're only within this small circle of comfort that you constantly feel, right? You would never get better at driving a car if you only drove around in an empty parking lot, right? You need to constantly be putting yourself out there. You know, you go from the empty parking lot to the neighborhood driving to maybe a little bit further. And then the next thing you know, you're driving on the interstate with hundreds of other drivers, right? So that can be applied to every single different concept in life. And genuinely, I really like the way that you think about it. All of these theorems and these different techniques that you can use for learnings, for the people that are listening, it might sound a little bit overwhelming, right? Because you're so incredibly knowledgeable on the subject, and I'm sure you spent a lot of time learning all of it. In terms of distilling it down, where would you say is step one for somebody that is looking to learn these things? And from step one, how do they get to step two? I know that you mentioned the unlearnings, but is that the first place that you should start? Or is it better to just start using these techniques to learn something else, and then the actual process of using those techniques in and of itself is an unlearning process?
So are you talking about learning the learning techniques, or like are you talking more general for learning?
Oh no, I'm talking about learning the learning techniques. Like we talked, a lot about all of these different techniques. What's the first step for someone that's looking to improve?
The first step, I would say, like, the actual first step is for you to like search up Dr. Justin Song. Like I said before, it's like he is the go-to person for me when it comes to like learning science.
So and, like, everything that you talked about is part of his curriculum?
Yes. And like I'm not
awesome.
even
That's
done
fantastic.
with his course yet. And like I'm only like a third way through his curriculum, and like it's already like changed and shifted the entire mindset I have about learning. But then
That's
after
awesome.
like someone learn and do some research about Dr. Justin Song and maybe enroll in his course, I would say like the next step for them is to actually like become aware of the level and the deficiency that they have in learning. Like after they finish an activity, maybe it could be like you finish reading a chapter of your book, or you like do some practice question preparing for exam, something like that, any practice. Just take a moment to do the COPE experimental cycle. Because from the COPE, you will realize that there are flaws in the way that you're learning and flaws in the techniques that you're using. And once you become aware of those techniques, you can start to create new experiments and improve on them. And I would say that that is a really easy first step that anyone could use to improve on a little bit, just a step up, so that they can see some improvement in themselves. And next is, after they have this new sense of self-awareness and they are creating these like experiments to test their hypothesis. I think like Alex Hormozi has a similar video about goal setting and testing hypothesis. So you can link that below for anyone who's interested.
I love Alex Hormozi.
Yeah. And step two, I would say, is like, whatever you do, like increase your cognitive tolerance. And cognitive tolerance is like how much knowledge is and how much thing you can actually keep in your head at a single time. And to put this in simple term, if you just think about the way that people normally learn, the cognitive level and the amount of thinking that you have to do is actually really low. So the tolerance that they have is like down here. And if we go too high, if you just go and try to do like mind map or of the entire, I don't know, like curriculum or something, you will face something called like the cognitive overload. This is when like your brain doesn't know what to do. There's too much information and like it
Mhm.
like really drains you and like you feel the sense of tiredness and like really frustrated. So the thing is
Yeah,
that
you just get super overwhelmed.
yeah. So the thing is that you realize that your tolerance level is probably down here, and now you want to increase that level gradually. And the way to increase this level is like back to the encoding and the retrieval process. For the encoding, instead of just learning things in the way that it's being taught to you in the order, like first create the question that you're curious about, that you want to learn the answer for. And more importantly, if the question can help you relay or help you think about different concepts together, then that would be even better. Because as we were talking earlier, like connections and the relationship is what matter most when it comes to learning. So create this question and then you start to find those questions in your learning, in your textbook, in your reading, in your book. And from there, when you found that piece of knowledge for that answer, don't just write it down linearly. Try to express it with arrows, use more visuals, and show the relationship between things, not just words. Because if you try this with like just writing words, you realize that you need like 2 to 3 sentences just to like explain one simple arrow. So it's actually much more efficient and like time saving. So just to summarize, because like that is a really big answer to your point. Like first, like become aware of where you are right now, improve it, creating those experiment from your hypothesis, and you can do this through the Kolb experimental cycle, KOLB. And then secondly, like once you're aware of where you are and you create new experiments to improve, and you know your tolerance level is pretty low down here, start to increase it gradually by comparing and contrasting with more and more things as you learn. Then finally, like one of the way you can practice with this is instead of just writing it down linearly, like the way you see in the textbook, use arrows and show the relationship, how this relates to that, and what does it look
Mhm.
overall. Yeah.
No, that was an excellent way to distill it down, man. Genuinely, I think that that's a perfect roadmap for people to visualize while they're going on a cognitive journey themselves. And you're so incredibly knowledgeable about this. I can tell that you're super duper passionate about the entire subject of learning and studying and applying these techniques. I was going to say, now that we're bridging a little bit closer towards the end of our time together, I would love to know what are you reading right now? What are some books that you would recommend to the people that are listening that might be interested in the learnings that you've been learning, or even just books that you're reading for fun?
Yeah. I would say like one of the most influential books that I read was The Third Door. And I really like that book because it really shifted my perspective into like what is actually possible for me. From Alex being this high in this like university kid, laying in his dorm, not knowing what to do with his life, to interviewing with Bill Gates and talking with all of these amazing people. It really shows you that if you actually dedicate your effort to something, you can actually do it. And I would say like the second book I would really recommend is Atomic Habits, because like I know like this is a popular book, but like James Clear really did a good job like incorporating like a lot of the different perspective when it comes to habit formation. Because actually, like the research paper about habits formation is like all over the place, and like there are people talking about different theories, and like they are disagreeing each other, and like the experiments are not making sense like that. But yeah, James Clear really did a great job, like giving us that holistic approach, and also that really simple but like actionable way to build habits. Because I believe that um, the habits that you have is actually much more important than just setting the goals yourself. It's like you can set the goals all you want. Like successful and unsuccessful people have the same goals, but like it's the habit and the thing that you do every day that really makes the difference. So I would say like first, The Third Door by Alex Bananyan. I think I pronounced his last name wrong. The Third Door to really give you this mindset, this open perspective that you can do things in life, and also Atomic Habits for you to form those habits and improve your life gradually. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, man. And Atomic Habits, it's such like you said, it's such a popular book, but I think it's popular for a reason, right? Because it's a fantastic book about habit formation. It's a fantastic book about getting everything done, and like you said, it's the consistent habits, it's the consistent formation of those neural connections that are going to make you 1% better. There's no doubt about it. If every single day you're practicing and you're making those habits and you're trying to learn, you're trying to be better, you will improve. There is no doubt about it. You may not see the improvement every single day, but if you keep hammering at that stone, you keep chopping at that block, you keep forming that statue, just like you're a sculptor sculpting yourself, one way or another, that is going to make you a better person. Well, Toan, thank you so much for joining me. Genuinely, I had a fantastic time with you speaking about all of these things. I have so much more to learn, which is super apparent to me. So, what's next for you, man? What are you working on? Any products that you have coming out? Let the people know if they want to get in contact with you. How can they do that? And of course, any tying thoughts that you have towards the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like this has been a really fun podcast, and like for me, right now I'm still holding in on my learning skill because I see that it's nowhere near from perfect, and I see that there's a lot of room for improvement. So the coming like 4 to 6 months, maybe, like I'm gonna really just be focusing on myself and improving my quality of learning. And I do this because I want to make sure that the content that I put out, they are actually helping the students and not harming them, because like spreading
That's great.
misinformation is actually like worse than not saying anything. That's my belief about it.
That's actually that's a great belief to have. I think a lot of people
Yeah.
on Twitter can learn from that.
Yeah. So yeah, that is what I'm going to be focusing on. But then the long term, if you want to zoom out, the reason that I'm talking about learning is because my life mission is that I want to improve the education system in general and worldwide.
Hmm.
And the way that I see I can help students and improve the education system is to two things. First, helping people study more efficiently so that they can learn faster and do like they can learn on themselves. Students can get higher grades, and from there they have more free time to do other things. And two is through like providing more equal and transparent opportunity for people to get a job. And I say this because I actually have this belief that the reason why the college degree still has its value is because like the employer, they do not have enough metrics and do not have enough like traits to measure someone's ability. And if you play
Hmm.
a game like FIFA or Football Manager, you will realize that each player, they have a specific like rating for each of the skill, and they even have like potential rating of where they'll be in 5 to 10 years, and then they can even measure like the behavior, the personality. So if we can do it in a game, why can't we do it in real life? And it's really just making the hiring process much more uh, analytical and more transparent instead of just using the college degree as a filter for everyone. And I would say like, yeah, that is just the vision of where I wanted to go. It's probably going to take 10, 15 years or even longer. And even if I'm not the person who who do this, like I really believe that I can share this belief out there, this idea out there, and if someone can do it, then that would dramatically improve the education system. Because it doesn't matter if I'm the person who's doing it. It matters that people are getting the opportunity that they deserve, and not because of the college that they went to. And even if like they went to a good college, it would show that they are better. And it does. They don't have to show that college degree that they are like they demonstrate or they have those skills. Yeah.
I love that. That's a fantastic mission, man. Seriously. I think that you have a really clear, defined goal. You're an extremely intelligent young man. I think that you're extremely capable, and I genuinely cannot wait to continue to be part of your journey and continue to see all that you accomplish. So, Toan, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it, man. Taking these past 45 minutes to speak to me. Quite frankly, not just speak to me, but teach me all of these concepts, introduce all of these concepts to me that now I can go back, I can do these learnings, I can share to my audience, and then hopefully we can make everybody a smarter, stronger, and more well put together population, which I think is everybody's end goal at the end of the day, right? For anyone that wants to help people with self-improvement.
Yes, and I just want to like distill like all of the learning tips that I gave everyone into like one final takeaway, which is like when you learn something, connect it to
Sure,
other
please.
things. Yeah, like don't learn anything in isolation. Form the connection between what you know with something that you want to learn. And you will do this through the process called inquiry based learning, which is when you ask multiple questions that help you examine the relationship. And the most useful question that you can ask, they are, why is this important? And how is this related to something else? And when you ask those two questions, you start to find the answer for it. You realize that, oh, so this is why it's important. Oh, this is why it's related to that. From there, you form this knowledge schema of like a spider web of how everything is laid out and how everything's connected to each other. And that's when you learn. That's when you see things and you start encoding into your brain, and definitely like to retrieve it, which is trying to remind yourself of what you learned, like use interleaving methods, and also like use methods that require you to think, or else you're simply not learning. So that is a short takeaway of like the key action point of people who are listening to this. They can get off this podcast and apply it straight away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that tie-in, Toan. I think that people should be taking notes throughout this entire podcast. If anybody has any questions, comments, concerns, they want to thank Toan for joining us today. I'll have all of his socials linked in the description. He should also have his handle underneath his name. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Have a fantastic day.